Welcome to this session. This session is going to be about Power documentation, integrating Markdowns, continuous documentation concept, and ADRs. And before we will go to the agenda, I would like to make some small introduction and tell you that it would be a pity if there is no documentation. So let's talk about fully, totally hypothetical examples of some situations. Let's imagine that you are working for the company making processors. And you released a new processor, and then you discover that there is a small issue with the computation when you are dividing some numbers. But you already shipped this to your customers, so you are a bit scared that they will get angry, so you do not want to mention this in the official documentation. However, it pops out quite fast, and even scientific community is figuring out that not everything is working on your processor, and they are publishing some papers explaining this. You're still denying that there's any issue, but in the end, customers are getting angry and need to pay a lot of money and ship the new processor to them. Or maybe you are building some fancy stuff which you would like to send to the space, and maybe you missed in the documentation what kind of units you are going to use in your software for your machine. And then no one knows what units should be used, and you send to the space and loses your machine and money which you invested. Or maybe you are investing a lot of money and you are building trading algorithm to grow more money, but unfortunately there's a bug in your software and no one knows how to fix it because you did not explain how the algorithm should work and how it was implemented, so you lost hundreds of millions of dollars. That would be a very best scenario if you are missing good and proper documentation and you are dealing with such issues. And those examples were totally hypothetical. However, all of them happened in real life. So the first example, 1994, there was a processor Pentium which actually had an issue to correct calculations with decimal numbers. The company did not want to release the official statement and document how the bug works. Community did that, and it cost the company anyway money because they need to fix a new hardware. Then, 1999, Mars orbiter, it was sent to the space, and it actually happened that people mixed up imperial and metric units, so it did not went well into the space. It cost only $125 million, this loss, and it was from 1999, so let's take into consideration inflation. This number nowadays would be much, much higher, only because you mixed up your units. And 2012, Knight Capital Group, they actually implemented trading algorithm which has a small bug which cost them $440 million loss within 45 minutes. And it was a bit difficult to fix because the algorithm was not properly documented. And I do not want to sound like some documentation drama queen and say that everything, all our issues are because of poor documentation. However, I strongly believe that if we have proper documentation, which is easy to maintain, updated, and easy to read and consume, we could avoid a lot of losses. Not only about the time, but as you can see, even in the meaning of money. My name is Daniel Gaszewski. I'm working as IT consultant at Soprasteria, Sweden. I'm specialized in Microsoft.NET platform, and I'm as well academic teacher at University College of Enterprise and Administration in Lublin. In the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you QR code to my LinkedIn profile, so if you would like to give me a feedback about this session or maybe slide deck, then write to me and I can send you the link. And what is the agenda for today? This presentation is divided in 4 parts. We will start with checking how people are looking at the documentation, if there are any scientific papers about the software documentation, what community wants from documentation, if it's important at all for us. Then I will share with you my first tips and tricks, how to deal with the documentation. And my background is mainly as a software developer, so I'm going to show you some small steps how you can improve your documentation in your software development team. However, I'm not going to give you gold solution for each case. It's more like a bunch of tips and tricks, what you can use in your current project. And this is something which I observed in different projects which I had as a consultant, that there's always struggle somehow with the documentation, and those small stuff which I came up during the years were quite easy and profitable for the team. Then I will show you the concept of continuous documentation, something which is not really popular yet, but I hope that if you ever heard about this, so after this session, I hope you will try to at least embrace the continuous documentation concept. And last but not least, I will be talking about architecture decision records. So here is a bit more about the IT architecture than software itself, but this I consider as an important thing in the documentation. Yeah, so let's start talking about evolving perspectives on the documentation. I was actually wondering if there is any research regarding software documentation. I know, very boring subject and not sexy, but maybe there was some nerd trying to figure it out what kind of documentation we should have and how we should produce it. And I found this document, for example, the relevance of software documentation, tools and technologies from Canada. There's a link, you can even read all the document. They came up to 3 main conclusions, so I can summarize it fast for you. The first thing is that the documentation is a tool for communication. And you remember those 3 cases which I showed you at the beginning of the presentation? All those stuff would be easier to maintain or even prevent if you communicate, for example, through documentation about important stuff like small details about units used in your software. So this is one aspect. Another thing is that we would like to have documentation which is easy to use and lightweight. So maybe not 200 pages of book with the documentation and technical stuff, because it's a pain to create such documentation, and let's be honest, few people are reading this. And last but not least, our documentation should track the changes. So when we are releasing the software and updating the software, the documentation should be updated as well. Because there is a lot of pain if you have documentation, but you figure it out that it's outdated because you updated the software, but documentation, this we can update later, and it never happens. And there is one sad thing about this, because I think like all of us can agree with those simple statements, but the sad thing is that that was discovered already in 2002. So like 22 years ago. And the question is, okay, now we have 2024. Anything changed since then? So I was trying to gather some data, not only like blog articles, but maybe some survey, some numbers, measures. And I found that most technical writers to 2018 are still using Microsoft Word for the documentation. So this can be a bit problematic because, as I said, it's not nice to sit in the Word and write long documents, which in the end no one wants to read, and they are difficult to update. And there is, I swear, a very peculiar fact which I noticed about the documentation, and unfortunately I encountered this as well in my previous projects. The last time it was before pandemic, and I hope I will never encounter this again, but when I see a documentation, technical documentation created in Microsoft Word, the first or the last page looks like this. There is a table with the version of the document. We have the number of the version, when the document was updated, what was updated, but not always. Sometimes the comment is missing, and then who did that. So, okay, I can check when the documentation was updated lately, if I have the updated document, but this table is like managed manually, and I do not think it's quite okay. And let's think about another tool which can help us, like, I don't know, having version history. Like, nothing came to my mind, but maybe you can figure it out what could be better than Microsoft Word for this purpose. So what could be the next stage to not have a Word document, but to have something better? So probably even in your projects, maybe you are using currently Confluence or Wikipedias, and basically this is Word document, but in the cloud. It's a bit better because you have better version history, for example. You do not need to write comments manually. You don't need to track the table and rows. It's done automatically, but still it gives the Microsoft Word feeling. It has pros and cons, because even if you are not a technical person, you know how to update such documentation. But still, is it very handy? Is it like helping us to develop and maintain software? Not always. So what could be done better? And here comes my first tip, how to deal with that and how to make a step forward. And my golden advice would be Markdowns. How many of you know what Markdown is? Okay, great. So almost all of you, so I don't need to show you a lot of examples. However, I can give you a fun fact, too, actually. The first one is that Markdown was created 24, so we have like 20 years anniversary for Markdown with us. And the question is why it's called Markdown. Have you ever thought about this? So if you check the definition, Markdown is a lightweight markup language for formatted text using plain text editor. Very simple, very lightweight, very demure. So this we like. But why it's called Markdown? The authors decided that, okay, this will not be like any other markup language, so let's call it Markdown. But that was the fun fact, and if we compare it to another markup language like HTML, which we have in the middle, on the left we have Markdown, on the right we have the rendered result. Why it's powerful? Because if we look at a raw Markdown file, we can have a look at the text and we can read it immediately. We know that there is a list of fruits, we know how many fruits are in each category, but if you would see only HTML, do you know how many items are on the list? How many intents are on the list? You need to think about it a bit more and you may be confused. And if you have a long HTML file, then it can be very difficult to imagine how it will be rendered if you will not stay and think about it and process in your mind. But with the Markdown, you can see it immediately. So basically, even if you are not a technical person, even if you are not HTML programmer, even then you can understand Markdowns. So it's easy to use for technical person and not non-technical person as well. And I know that you already know Markdowns, but I'm wondering how many of you are using Markdowns on a daily basis. Oh, some of you, like 15 people here, 20. But then, for those of you who did not raise the hand, are you using daily Reddit? Anyone? One person, two, okay. Stack Overflow. A bit more. Microsoft Teams. Even more. And last but not least, ChatGPT. So the thing is that if you are using any of those tools already incorporated Markdown, and you can as well communicate in those tools using Markdowns. So even if you are not using Markdowns deliberately on a daily basis, you are doing this indirectly through some of the tools. So it's very well established in our market. But how is about our software, our project, our documentation there? Well, if you have your documentation in Microsoft Word or in Confluence, my suggestion as the first step to make it better would be to move this to Markdown files. There are plenty of converters, for example, from Word document to Markdown, so you don't need to rewrite everything which you have right now. And you can put it to Git. Because if you will upload it to Git and commit and push, then you have version history. And nowadays, you do not need to update those files in a notepad. You can use a web browser. You basically do not need to have access to Git extensions or any other Git client. You don't need to have terminal. You can just open the website. It's supported in GitHub, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket. If you log into your repository on the website, you can go to your MD files. You can see the raw content. You can change it in your web browser. And you can as well have a quick preview how it will be rendered in the end. So nowadays, it's very handy to work with the Markdowns in our Git. And now comes another question for you. And I'm going to ask you 4 questions. And I would like to ask you to stand up. And if you are answering no, then you can sit down. If you are answering yes, you can keep standing. Are you catching on? Yes. So now I can ask all of you to stand up. And the first question is, do you have a definition of done in your current project? If not, please sit down. If you do have, please stay standing. Yes? Yeah. If you're asking, then maybe you don't have it, but basically definition of done is the team's definition when the task is completed. Then the next question is, does your definition of done require code reviews? If not, please sit down. If yes, please stand. I'm impressed that you are still standing. I did this session for other conferences, and already even here, like half of the audience were down. So the third question, does your definition of done require updates of software documentation? That escalated fast. So the last question for those 5 people still standing, do you really update the software documentation? Okay, there are still 3 people standing up, so applause for you. If you have documentation in Markdowns, and if you require code reviews, if you have pull requests, then actually your documentation in Markdown file is going to be shown in the pull request. So you do not need to remember that, okay, there is some documentation in Confluence, wiki pages, or some document. It's here with the code. And what is very nice is that you can as well check not only that it was updated within the pull request, you can actually verify that it makes sense to the changes of the code. And if the documentation reflects really the code changes and the new feature. However, maybe some of you are already not happy with the picture. There is one thing missing, which makes that if I'm like reviewer for this pull request, I would immediately press change request for this. Do you have any ideas why I do not like such pull requests? What is missing? Yes? Summary. That's a good point, because here's like very simple implementation, but usually you have like larger pull requests with bigger features. So that would be nice to describe at least what the pull request is about, but it's not the only thing. Exactly. If I see that there is a pull request changing something in the backend in the code and there is no unit tests, then I'm used to reject this immediately, because I consider as well unit tests as a part of the documentation. In Markdown files, usually I would suggest to document the feature, to make a description how it should work, what is the processes which is included in the feature, but explaining single methods and classes, this can be done with unit tests. And then when you are reviewing such pull request, you have full coverage of the documentation of your software project because you have description of the feature in the documentation, you have your unit tests, and of course you can see the code. So that was the first steps which you can do to make the documentation better, according to my experience. And this is something simple. Just create Markdown files and describe your features in those files and push them to the Git. And then you can review them every time when you are making changes in the system. In this way, you have documentation which is lightweight, documentation which you can use to communicate with your team and even other stakeholders. And there was something else very good to have it, which popped out from my mind. But it's very good. Yes, I could recommend it. So this is the first step, very easy step to do. You do not need to pay license for any tool if you already are using Git, which I assume most of you are doing, so you do not need to change anything in your project. Just talk to your team and discover your options in this way. But this is a small step, and maybe some of you are already doing this. How many of you already has documentation in Markdowns? Like, okay, 1/3. It's much more than I expected, but this is a good sign. So for those of you who already are in this stage, what you can do more. So here comes another concept. And before I introduce it, I can say that we know a lot of acronyms which starts with continuous, like continuous integration, like continuous delivery. And there is a new concept, which is called continuous documentation. Have you ever heard about this? Silence. So I would like to introduce this concept now. What is continuous documentation? You can actually find a manifesto for this on the website. However, I would like to warn you that this manifesto is created by a company developing a product, commercial product. So yes, they are earning money and they have interest to promote such concepts. However, as a manifesto itself and the concept of continuous documentation, I strongly believe that it's worth to dig into and to embrace in current projects. This manifesto you can find on the website for the product called Swim, and the product, of course, helps you with the documentation. And I can summarize for you the concept of continuous documentation with 3 principles. And this part is very low code, so it's like code documentation, not the documentation which you would like to ship to end users, for example. So they are saying that your documentation should be code coupled. Why? Because if you're making changes to the code, it should be reflected in the documentation. It should be always up to date, and it should be created when best, which means that the best is not after the release, it's not after the review, it's during the implementation. So for example, the case with pull request, you are developing a new feature and you are shipping as well update of the documentation. So this is like the next step. If you already have documentation in Markdowns and you would like to have something more fancy, you can try to use Swim. And nowadays, everything has to be about AI. So they, of course, have AI as well. So if you use the tool to scan your code and build some corpus of your documentation for your software, they have as well language learning models. So basically, you can talk to your documentation with this tool. But sometimes this and Markdowns files are not enough. Maybe you have more complex requirements. And then I could recommend another tool, which is called Docusaurus. If you check the website, they are saying that you can create a beautiful documentation site in no time. Very grateful. And basically, this is what you can do with this. You can take your documentation and deploy as a website. They are using as well Markdown files, so if you already have documentation in Markdowns, it's easy to move here. So that's why I'm talking about steps. The first step could be to move to Markdown, then to Git, then maybe use other tools. And this is another variation, but there are some cases where I could recommend the Docusaurus. And Docusaurus has plenty of features, but I figured out that there are 5 or 6 which can be crucial. If you are answering for any of those needs as yes, we have this need, then maybe Docusaurus is for you. So first thing, of course, if you need an open website, let's say that we are building API which you would like to sell and ship the documentation, then you can do it out of the box with the Docusaurus. If you need to support different versions of your product, it happens quite often with APIs as well, then maybe you need to have as well documentation for different versions of your software, which means that you need to have different software running on the server and different documentations describing this. This can be a bit difficult to achieve if you have just loosely files with Markdown in the Git. But with Docusaurus, it's much more handy. Another thing is full text search. And again, if you need to search through your documentation because it's growing over the time, you can do it in your Git if you are using Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, GitHub, etc. However, there are situations when not only your team, your developers want to have access to the documentation, but as well other stakeholders, maybe stakeholders who are not programmers. And this is a case for my current project, for example. Then when you are using full search in Git through the website, then you are getting results as well for the code. And maybe your stakeholder, which is not a very technical person, do not want to see the code, and it's scared to see such files. Then you need to figure it out a better way. Maybe Docusaurus is better, because then you can search through the content of documentation itself, not the code. If you want to promote your product and promote your documentation, then Docusaurus is as well optimized for SEO, so it can be as well the way to promote your product on the website or in the internet. And the last thing is internalization. If you need to ship a documentation in different languages, like human languages, like German, Swedish, etc., not like Python, etc., then Docusaurus can help you again because it supports different language version of the documentation. So if you have any of those needs, then maybe Markdowns are too little for you and you need to go further for external tooling. And of course, there are more tools. This is those which I try to explore and I could recommend. But of course, you can try to find other solutions. But this is only an example, so the idea how you can put forward your documentation in your project. So we were talking about Markdown files, about Git, pull request, definition of done, about tooling like Swim and Docusaurus. And it's great. But there are some things which you cannot put to such documentation. And something which I was quite often missing is architectural decisions. If you have dedicated IT architect in your company or in your team, then probably you have some guy working 100% with the architecture, and this guy is writing like tons of diagrams in Archimate and documenting everything about the architecture. But it's not always the case. There are organizations saying, why do we need to spend so much money for some IT architect? Why our self-organized Scrum team cannot do it? And it happens that maybe you do not have a dedicated person, maybe you have architect which is available like 20% of the time and does not have time to document so much. And you need to take architectural decisions constantly. Even if you are working with a project which you do not develop anymore, you're just supporting in the current production environment and maybe fixing bugs. Even then, you are forced to take architectural decisions. The easiest example is upgrade of the servers. Old servers are getting deprecated, they are not supported anymore, and you need to move your application to newer servers. This is a type of architectural decision. What kind of servers, when, what kind of features you are going to use. On the newest server, maybe you need to turn on encryption. What kind of encryption isn't going to work with your application? Do you need to make changes in your application? This is architectural decision. Even if you are not developing new project, even if you are not developing current project and only maintaining this. And the question is how we are going to document this. Are we going to write Markdown files about this as well? It's not like the current state of our software. It's explanation what kind of decision we took regarding the architecture, what was our evaluation, and why we did what we did. So it's not like strictly describing the processes and how the software works, but how we as a team or as a dedicated person decided how to move forward. So here I have another recommendation, the last one, just for architecture decisions. And to show you how you can do it, it's very practical. I can give you an example from the real life. So the example is about Vue. How many of you are using Vue in the production, in the applications? 5, 6 people. React, Angular, the rest of you. So this is basically a front-end framework. It was released in February 2014, and again, 10 years anniversary, a lot of anniversaries this year. The update, Vue number 2, was published in September 2016, and they released as well Vue 3 in 2020. However, the third version of Vue included breaking changes. Not so breaking, but breaking enough to break the code. So if you would like to, if you have already application in Vue 1 or 2 and you want to move to Vue 3, it's not just upgrading the new packages, you need to make as well changes in your code. Not maybe tremendous changes, but anyway, it requires changes. And the sad thing is that Vue 2 has reached end of life in 2023. So if you are using in your production Vue 2, then you are using unsupported version. And this may be a bit not appropriate from the security point of view. And if you're working for huge organizations, usually one of the requirements from IT department is that you are not allowed to use unsupported frameworks. So if you are in the situation that it's 2024, and you are still using a Vue, let's say 2.5, then you have a problem. And then you need to decide what to do next. And this is as well an architectural decision which you need to take. Your architect, or maybe your self-organized Scrum team, or maybe you. So what you can do, scenario number 1, do nothing, and just live like this. Scenario number 2, you can upgrade to the newest minor version of Vue 2, and then you can order so-called never-ending support. And there is a company, they are called Dev Heroes, I think. They are actually offering so-called never-ending support. You can sign the contract with them, you can pay money for them, and they guarantee you that if there will be a critical bug in Vue number 2.7, then they are going to deliver a fix for this within 14 days. So here you have like compliance, okay, it's older version, not supported, but supported anyway. I'm not making this up. This is like the real thing. Scenario number 3 can migrate to view number 3. Or scenario number 4, you can rewrite everything to React because it's fancy and we like to learn new framework. How you can deal with the situation. You would like to somehow document this decision. So in half years, if someone asks you why you did like this, then you can open here. You're welcome. You can read what was the reasons behind our decision. So what you can do in easy way, especially if you do not have dedicated IT architect. Here I can refer to something from ISA Global. It's an organization which it's non-profit organization for IT architect or business, like all of the type of architects, not only IT architects, but as well like solution, technology architects, business architects, etc. They developed something called BTABOK, Business Technology Architecture Body of Knowledge, which you can apply as an architect for everything. It's about customers, it's about as well like code and technical stuff, but a lot of as well about how your user feel when they are using your app, for example. And this is an overview. It's like open source. You can Google BTABOK, ISA, and you will find this. All those resources are described. There is certification for that, but you can just read the pages on the internet. And this is like the overview. There is a lot of icons. If you press on some icon, you have under categories. So it's like very huge tool, which consists of quite often a lot of canvas. So you are working on canvas with this. There are so many canvas that I couldn't even count how many of them are. But there is one which I loved and which I'm using until today. And I forced my team to do it. Not forced, but I brought it up during the sprint retrospective and make other people love it as well. And the one thing which I would recommend is architecture decision record card. This is like Canva card. You can literally take it and print it. You can as well go to the website and download it as a PowerPoint presentation. You can copy and paste it to Miro if you have hybrid team online. And you can document your decision, filling all those squares. And you can think that, okay, it's a bit lame to make an architectural decision and fill some Canva like in the kindergarten. But do you really want to write long, like 15 pages document describing we are a financial company having the application and taking the transaction for this? And no one is going to read it when you actually need to update your framework for frontend. So maybe it is easier and faster to just fill the Canva. You can print it, put it on the wall, and you can make the decision with your team what to do next. Another advantage, except for the fact that it's fast to do it, easy to fill all the boxes, it's easy to read as well. Because if you fill this Canva and someone is going to ask you, okay, what was your decision, why you did that, what kind of alternatives you considered, you're welcome. Here you have 3 options. You can have a look. And you can literally take like a couple of minutes and you understand what was evaluated, how, which areas you were checking, which were relevant for you, what were the constraints or consequences which you were thinking about back then. So it's easy to make, but as well easy to consume. And I think it's wonderful. That's why I really like this Canva. And there are some as well particular features regarding just architecture, which we, maybe not we, but me, in my team sometimes forgot. And those canvas are helping me to keep on track all the changes. But let's have a look how the canvas is composed. You start with the context, so you need to explain what happened. Like in our example, view 2 lost, like reached end of time. Then you need to explain as well requirements. What are requirements for our architectural decision from other departments, from us in our team, etc. What is the decision scope? Is it affecting some internal application in the organization or maybe million of users for our company? Of course, final decision, so it's like in the middle of the Canva because it's final decision, the most important thing in the Canva. But then you have options. And by default, you should evaluate like around 3 options. Of course, you can evaluate less, but then if you have like 2 options or 1, then maybe it's too little and you did not make a great research. You can add more, like 4 up to 5, but if you're putting more than 5, then it's getting messy, and then it's getting difficult to fill in, difficult to take the decision, to elaborate about the decision and all the options, then maybe you should scale it down. So the gold number is like 3 options to evaluate. You can add a bit more, remove 1, but keep to this number. And then you have areas. You can point out what kind of features or things are very important in your decision. It's not common for every project to have the same areas. You are deciding what is important in your evaluation, what actually you are evaluating. And the next box is characteristics, and here comes a huge thing. Like for me, when I was learning this, I was a bit surprised why I did not used to do it before, and now it's like natural part of the process. Here you can put 4 stuff about reversibility, decision duration, information quality, and effort. Reversibility is about, okay, if you are taking this decision, is it easy for us to back and change the decision? Sometimes maybe we need to explode the system and write a new one, then it's a bit difficult to reverse the decision, but in this case, maybe we have more flexibility. And the next thing, which blew my mind a bit, but is actually a bit simple, is about decision duration. How many of you are re-evaluating your architectural decisions? You are sleeping or you are not doing your job. Because if you are taking an architectural decision, it's not written in the stone. Even if it is, and you are deciding that we are taking this decision and we are not changing no matter what, even then, it's good to make a retrospective and come back to this decision and think, was it a good decision? Could I do better? If I had more information, would I decide something else? So this is as well a good exercise for you. Even if the decision is not changeable, it's good to learn from your previous experience. And here you do not need to put explicitly, okay, I'm going to re-evaluate this decision in December 29th and the meeting at 12. But you are putting, okay, in a couple of weeks, couple of months, etc. Then you have authority, who made the decision, and some consequences which were not suitable for the areas and option description. So the last thing which I'm going to show you how our example is fitting in this. So after this session, you can do architecture decision recall cards by yourself. The context, Vue 2 reached end of life in December. Requirements, our company forbid using unsupported frameworks, so we must change. Decision scope, let's say that it's only our project and because only we are using Vue, only we are fancy. And then your options. The option number 1 is not possible because there is a requirement that we are not allowed to use unsupported frameworks. So we have only 3 options: buy never-ending support for outdated Vue, migrate to Vue number 3, or move to React. And then we have some areas like support, development, cost, maintainability. So for the cost, for example, if you order never-ending support, you do not need to make any work. You are just paying for the company on early basis that if something happens, you are going to help us. But if you want to migrate to Vue number 3, you need to maybe rewrite some code, and let's say that we are estimated this for 120 hours of devs working hours, and it costs around 120K. So this is much more than never-ending support. And in the case with moving to React, we need to learn React first. So we estimated that it will take 1,200 of hours and much more money to do. So we decided to upgrade to Vue 2 and buy never-ending support. Why, I can explain later. It's a hypothetical example. But let's have a look on the characteristics. Let's say that this is reversible. If we decide next month to migrate to Vue number 3, we can do it. Decision duration, we can evaluate this after a couple of weeks or 1 month. Information quality, we did great research. We contacted company about never-ending support. We estimated 12-hour working hours, etc. And effort in time, people, or money, it's low because it was the cheapest option for us to do. And then comes consequences and rationalities. Here we took this decision because, let's say, we do not have money right now and time to migrate to Vue number 3, which was the most desirable option, because we need to put time in the new feature. Our users are craving a specific new feature right here, right now, so we cannot put time and money for just migrating the code. And here comes a very nice thing about decision duration, because maybe in 3 months we got new financing from new stakeholder, or maybe we will have time actually to migrate. So after 3 months or a couple of weeks, you can re-evaluate this decision, check if it was correctly or not done, and maybe change it. So, to summary, I had a bunch of tips and tricks for you regarding the documentation, how to do it better. First recommendation was to use Markdown files and move to Git. Then to embrace continuous documentation concept that you are going to review and update your documentation frequently. If you have more needs, you can use external tools like Docusaurus or Swim. And regarding the architectural decisions, you can use simple canvas to document them and store them. They are easy to write and as well easy to consume. So here comes a QR code. You can scan it and you will have access to my LinkedIn profile. You can send me feedback about this session, that maybe it sucks, or maybe you would like me to make this session in your company. If you want to have slides, I can send a link to you. Just ping me on LinkedIn. And I don't know if you have time for Q&A. If you have any questions. Yes? Yes, so the question is about diagrams. And of course, you can embed pictures in Markdown, but it sucks to have pictures in Git repository. I do not have in the current project needs for this in this type of documentation. However, there are tooling which supports diagrams in Markdown files, so you can actually write diagrams in Markdown and they will be rendered. I think one of the tools can be Mermaid, but I have never used it and never tested this, but I heard about it. Any more questions? If not, thank you so much, and I hope that you will embrace the concept of the continuous documentation for your current project.